Brilliant. How many people do we have just now? He asks after she mutes herself. Yeah. Brilliant. Well, I might kick us off. We'll get underway, and if people join as they join, then that's absolutely fine. So thank you everybody that has come along. I can't see all of your names at once, but there are definitely a few familiar faces and names popping up as you came through. I'm going to do a quick karakia just to bring us together, and then introduce myself and ourselves, and then we'll just jump into the work. Tui tuia e runga tuia e raro tuia e roto tuia e waho tui tuia kia rongo te ao kia rongo te pō humie ue paikie. Ngā mihi nui kia koutou katoa. No mai, haere mai ki tēnei webinar e pā ana i ke tautoko i te toiora i muri i te tahi moriarea. Whakarongo mai, i te ro mai, noho ora mai. Welcome everyone to our first webinar of what is hopefully a series. And this one, as you all will be aware, is about supporting wellbeing after a crisis, and with a particular angle thinking about both the COVID-19 pandemic and natural disasters like Cyclone Gabriel. So tēnā koutou. Ko Pākehā te whakapaparanga mai o no Ingarangi mā te mātua Māui o Kutipuna. Engari ko tauhara te maunga e awhi nei iau, ko taupo nui atea te moana e whangai nei iau, ko taupo te whenua tupu, ko Ngāti Tūwhare toa te iwi kaitiaki tangata. E nānei ko whanganui atara te kāinga, e kai whakahaere puna ha toiora atataki au i te Hiringa Mahara, ko Matthew Bloomer ahau tēnā tātou katoa. I'm Matthew Bloomer. I'm the Acting Director of Wellbeing System Leadership, which is why I have trouble getting my own job title over my tongue. But it's a pleasure to host you all today. So thank you again for coming along. I know Katie's already said it, but before I introduce our other speakers, I just want to note the session is recorded. It will be available on the website later, and you're welcome to leave your camera on or off or whatever you like. There'll be time for questions and comments at the end, but please put your questions into the chat and we'll answer them as we go as best we can. And so I would like to introduce first to our Te Hiringa Mahara's Chief Executive, Karen Orsborn. And she's going to talk quickly about the role of Te Hiringa Mahara and why we're shining a light on the impacts of COVID-19. And then later we'll hear from Dr. Claire Ahmad, CEO of the Social Services Providers Aoteaora Association. Sorry. Karen, all yours.
Tēnā koutou, no mai haere mai ki te koutou katoa. Ko Karen Orsborn toko ingoa, ko o te tumu whakarai o te Hiringa Mahara. I'm Karen Orsborn, Chief Executive of Te Hiringa Mahara. Just a few words about us. Te Hiringa Mahara, the Mental Health and Wellbeing Commission, was established in 2021 as an independent Crown entity and having oversight of the mental health and wellbeing system. So we monitor the system, services and wellbeing, and advocate for better and equitable mental health and wellbeing outcomes for people in Aotearoa. We have a particular focus on people's lived experience of distress and addiction and the whānau who support them. We've recently published the paper Supporting Wellbeing After a Crisis, the fifth in a series of 8 papers that give insight into the impact of COVID on populations and communities. This is our very first webinar, so we're hoping the tech goes okay. And we really look forward to hearing from Matt and Claire from the Social Service Providers Aotearoa organisation as they share the insights from the work that's been done and their experiences on the ground, and also as we hear from people who have joined this webinar. So I look forward to that. So nō reira, tēnā koutou katoa.
Thanks, Karen. Claire, do you just want to quickly introduce yourself, and then I will take control back and make you be quiet for an extended period, if that's all right?
Kia ora, Matt. Tēnā tātou katoa, ka nui te mihi kia koutou I hurino I te motu I tēnei ahiahi. Ko wai au no Airani ko te raname Indonesia o Kutipuna I te taha o Toku Matua no Indonesia ahau I te taha o Toku Whaia no Airani me Kotirana. I whānau hau I te marawa te maunga o Waitakere, I Tamaki Makaurau, I Tipuaki ahau I te kāinga o Titarangi, I te taha o te awa o te whau. Ko te whanganui atara e noho ana, ko ahau te kaiwhakahaere I social service providers te pai ora o Aotearoa, ko Claire Atma tuku ingoa. Nō reira, tēnā tātou katoa. I'm Claire. It's such a pleasure to be here today with wonderful Te Hiringa Mahara colleagues. So thanks so much for the invitation to join you on this webinar today. Really looking forward to our conversation. Kia ora.
Kia ora. Thanks, Claire. And I will launch straight in. So I think you will have seen a short agenda in the meeting invite, but we're sort of 10 or 15 minutes of me sharing the highlights from our report, and then Claire giving a much more interesting sort of take on it based on what she and her organisation are seeing in East Cape and Hawke's Bay and elsewhere. And then there'll be time for questions and any further discussion that anybody wants. So we're going to kick off with talking about COVID-19. So this piece of work came from our COVID-19 series. Obviously, COVID-19 is sort of one of the most significant events most of us will experience, and it's very aware and continue to acknowledge that it's not over yet and it's continuing to go, but we are sort of interested in what the wellbeing impacts have been and will continue to be, and what we can learn from this so that we can support wellbeing in Aotearoa. So we kicked off this body of work last year, producing a series of short reports. We don't have the time or resources to chase down every possible piece of information or every possible facet of wellbeing, so we had to sort of choose some short targeted ones. And the idea that we sort of address some of the gaps identified in what is sort of the current narrative of what is happening around wellbeing and what the pandemic has meant for people and what the pandemic will continue to mean for people. And so far, we've focused on the impacts on older people, on rural communities, on safety in the home, and how mental health is reflected in media coverage in Aotearoa. So all those reports are available on our website. And then the insights we gathered so far provide the basis for this report that we're here to talk about today, supporting wellbeing after crisis. So, I mean, in short, we sort of saw what was happening in the wake of Cyclone Gabriel and said, we have something to contribute here. We have all this information that we've gathered for the report so far. Let's bring it together and see what's applicable. And so that's the report that you hopefully have had a chance to see, but if not, you'll care about today and can find it anytime you like. So on the screen in front of you, I'm sort of getting slightly in and out of line with my slides, which is the nature of doing the first webinar. Our sort of key lessons that we learned looking across our COVID-19 series is that inequities have been exacerbated. What COVID seems to have done largely is shone a light on where things were unequal or difficult already in Aotearoa and made them worse or more obvious. And bringing that into sort of a more general findings for crisis, not just the pandemic, it's obvious that there are mental health, addiction, and wellbeing challenges, that they are going to be complex. People facing uncertainty and loss and disruption, and the services and supports available to them have been severely disrupted. So that might be health and wellbeing support that you get from the government or from the council, but it's also connection with whānau and friends and workplaces, all that stuff that contributes to good wellbeing. It's severely disrupted and not necessarily easy to know when things are going to come back together. And on top of that, there's a lot of trauma involved with these most recent crises, and so there's a new community of people who will suffer from mental health and wellbeing issues following a crisis like this. The challenges that we see then, they vary by community, by location. They vary for different individuals and whānau. And so that's a key thing to keep in mind, is that as we support wellbeing through and after a crisis, there's going to be quite a diverse set of needs. Some people will feel isolated. Some people are facing economic hardship. Some people will be in unsafe situations or at risk of violence, and some people will be a combination of all these things. And as a result of all this, we can also expect the rates of distress and addiction, and therefore need for help in those areas, to increase. As I said, the reports that we drew on, that we've done so far, focused on rural communities, older people, safety in the home. So there are sort of particular lessons that we can take from those that apply here. I'm not going to delve into them too much because we'll be here all day, but just sort of knowing that because that's what we base this on, that's where we've got particular extra information. And I think Leah will be able to talk to some of that from what she's learned as they're going. But it's not just about the challenges, right? So we've got, there are common themes across what we've learned from COVID-19 that are applicable in any crisis, and we'll sort of identify things that work well and seem to show up every time. And again, it comes back a little bit to that idea of that the pandemic has highlighted inequities, but it's also highlighted strengths, and it hasn't necessarily created them. It's just shown where they are, and they've been put to their test, I guess. So we've seen time and again across our reports that Māori-led responses have offered community protection and support for Māori and for non-Māori. We've seen that when government and funders can jump in with a lot of trust and low compliance and provide resources to communities and community groups on the ground, they do an amazing job because they know what is needed and they're ready to go. We've seen a lot of community leaders stepping up to meet local needs, often when they consider that central government has failed to act in the way that's needed, or isn't acting fast enough, or isn't quite focused in the right area. So sometimes they're acting with support, and sometimes they're acting because there's a lack of support. And we've seen that community organisations like churches act as hubs for social check-ins, have been distributing resources, information, necessities, providing connection for people. It's been hugely valuable in the pandemic, and we're seeing it already in the wake of immediately in the wake of Cyclone Gabriel. That's sort of a key takeaway for us. So taking those few short points and expanding them out a little bit into sort of where we see that ongoing effort or support is needed in the wake of Cyclone Gabriel, but in the wake of any crisis. As I mentioned, we can expect that the needs for some people will increase. We see that in the immediate term, government needs to focus on those who are already disadvantaged, including people and whānau with lived experience of distress or addiction, and those people who are already experiencing the inequity that we talked about earlier. These people tend to bear the worst effects of crises. They face many of the greatest challenges as the economic or environmental or societal recovery goes on. And without particular support or without targeted help, tend to not benefit from that recovery as much. In terms of actually doing that work, immediate support should be provided to community groups, especially marae and churches and other social hubs, because they're integral to supporting wellbeing. So, like I said, community organisations are deeply embedded on the ground. They're well placed to respond to changing needs. Government support should help those organisations now and immediately, and we've seen some of that already, of course. There's been some great responses from government agencies and the Ministry of Health and Te Whatu to support organisations and to support individuals. But I think as well as that, there needs to be ongoing support for sustainability and resilience for those organisations, because we need them to be here when the next crisis happens. And that's the sad truth, I guess, is that there's always going to be a next crisis, which is why we're having this conversation. As I said, the high trust, low compliance approach has been good, and it needs to be picked up further. And we saw that through COVID-19. We've seen it already in Cyclone Gabriel. And if we do the work now to ensure that there is a flexible approach to providing support, then we can draw on local knowledge and local energy and support people. Decision making about responding to the crises and supporting wellbeing more broadly really needs to be done in partnership with Māori, inclusive of Māori leadership, if you want it to reach Māori. But also it sort of proves the point time and again that what works for Māori tends to work well for everybody around them as well. And so it's a everybody wins situation. And we'd also suggest that support for communities should take an equity approach, actively involving and empowering those who experience disadvantage. The findings from our reports particularly highlight Pacific people, disabled people, people in rainbow communities, migrants and former refugees, older people, young people, veterans in rural communities. It's right across the board, but if we take a one-size-fits-all approach, we seldom get the wellbeing support that we need. And one of the key things from all that in the immediate and ongoing term in the phase following a crisis is the need that we've highlighted, and we highlight again and again, that we need to re-establish the infrastructure that supports community connection and community services, especially in rural communities like we're seeing over in the East Cape. And so, that means ensuring that social hubs like marae and libraries are up and running, and face-to-face support like care and social worker visits and are back in place. Schools can reopen, and ensuring that community services and volunteers can reach into the communities and are supported to do so. As these things are disrupted, it reduces people's well-being in the sense that they lack the connection that supports their well-being, but also removes some of those useful connections that provide real resources, real support, real oversight, particularly for children or women at risk of family violence. And so, I guess that's our key underlying message from this all is that social infrastructure needs to be re-established and supported throughout, and that supports everything else as it goes. It's worth noting, I guess, that rural communities can be hit particularly hard by crises, not just because, in this case, it's taking place in a rural setting, but because they have access to fewer healthcare options, less internet infrastructure, and often have an older than average population which has associated needs. You bring all those things together and it makes it particularly challenging to support ongoing wellbeing. And so one of our further sort of particular parts off the back of supporting social infrastructure is ensuring that digital infrastructure for rural and isolated groups is supported, because not only will it provide support in the immediate aftermath of the crisis, but it also provides support before the next one, and it means that people have access to the different information and support they're going to receive that the one-size-fits-all makes very available through digital infrastructure, but when there's a digital divide, then certain people miss out. So that's sort of in the immediate or short term. In the longer term, I mean, I've already probably said it enough times now, it's about ensuring there's resilience within community groups. And we're not talking about individual resilience, that's important, but it's making sure that the infrastructure, the social infrastructure that's there, is ready and able to support people, is resourced, is sustainable, so that when the next crisis happens, like we say, there's support for it. And this will help prevent and mitigate many of the worst mental health, addiction, and wellbeing effects of the next crisis. That said, there's still going to be the need for mental health services, particularly trauma-informed ones, and that needs to be supported and available. It needs to be ongoing, long-lasting. We know that the impacts of trauma affect different people differently, and for some people it's quite a short-term thing where they need lots of support. For some people it's a very long-term thing where it recurs. We saw after the Christchurch earthquakes this sort of need, and we saw the effects of things like aftershocks affecting people's mental health and wellbeing in an ongoing way. And we've seen glimpses of the same thing in Cyclone Gabrielle. We're hearing from communities where just every storm has a traumatic effect as people wonder what's going to happen next and how we're going to go through it all again. And so that ongoing mental health support of peer group or health practitioners or more specialist support will be needed. And I guess the little take home at the end of all that is, while we're talking about one crisis and we're learning from COVID-19 and we're thinking about the next crisis, it sort of all rolls together a bit, and preparing for future crises requires that ongoing support now. It requires ensuring that people are supported through this one, but that we're investing for the next one. And we need to ensure that we are acting now while the attention is there and while there's the will, and laying the groundwork to help keep people well through the next crisis. That is my garbled spiel of the short version of our report. With any luck, slides are with me. So as Karen said at the start, and as I've mentioned briefly, this is part of a series, so we've produced those reports that I outlined, and we've got the next couple coming up over the next couple of months. So there'll be some more coming, which we encourage you to keep an eye on our website, or let us know if you'd like to receive an email. So the next three are looking at expressions of tēnā rangatira through the pandemic, and then looking at Pacific wellbeing, and then we have a summary report that will pick up the key lessons across all our reports, as well as a bit of a view on the priority populations that Te Hiringa Mahara is particularly concerned with. So I would just ask you all to keep an eye and be ready to have a read. You might find something that you're particularly well interested in. And then I'm going to hand to Claire, who's going to actually turn my ramblings into something really practical, I think.
Got them at, and I will just share my slides. So one moment, everyone. Good to go on that. Everyone can see that. Excellent. All right. Well, anō tēnā tātou katoa ina mana, ina reo, ina hoewha. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Ka nui te mihi ora kia tātou katoa. Warm and well greetings of wellness to everyone who is joining this webinar today. As I said, such a pleasure to have the chance to be with you this afternoon and to be focusing on this really important kaupapa. So also just ka nui te mihi ki rangatira mā I te Hiringa Mahara me te kaimahi katoa. Warm greetings to all of the rangatira and kaimahi at te Hiringa Mahara. Thank you for the mahi that you have been doing and that you do to highlight the kaupapa of mental health and well-being. And also warm greetings to everyone who's joined us today across our community sector. I know some of our members are here with us today. And also from across government and the wider social sector too. Great to see you here. So look, I thought I would just start by briefly introducing social service providers Te Paiora o Aotearoa or SSPA as I'll refer to us today just for shorthand. So we are a values-led organisation. You can see our values here. We have been working now for 20 plus years. Our vision is that Aotearoa's community-based social services are sustainable, able to make a positive impact every day, supporting our children and rangatahi and whānau to thrive both now and into the future. We have around 240 member organisations throughout the motu, right from the Tipiri top up in Te Tai Tokerau down to the deep south and everywhere in between. And our role is to champion our members and the mahi that they do. They are the ones who are walking alongside whānau and hapori every day. And so it's about strengthening their mahi so that they can in turn be doing what they do best, serving in our communities and hapori. And we do our work through a mix of policy and advocacy work. We provide professional development for our community-based social services, and we're a relationship weaver and sector leader across our social sector. So I hope that just locates who we are as SSPA. As I said, the mahi that we do is first and foremost, it really is about the aspirations and the outcomes of families and whānau in our beautiful country. And it is about focusing on their strengths and helping to build their strengths so that they can live the lives that they want to and that build on the aspirations of for our tangata whenua of their tipuna. We see that the connection between the well-being of whānau and families is deeply connected to the well-being of our social services kaimahi, the people who are walking alongside these communities and whānau, often in really tough times. So that's why we focus on these two things together in our mahi, and it is really about wrapping that manaaki both around whānau and around kaimahi. Recognising this and also the really demanding few years that we have experienced in Aotearoa New Zealand and globally, in particular because of the pandemic, we have been deepening our focus at SSPA on mental health and well-being over the past couple of years. One expression of this, just to give you a sense of some of the work that we do, has been our focus on kaimahi hauora. So last year we piloted our Kaimahi Hauora program. This was a 6-week program for anyone working across our community-based social services to basically focus on their wellbeing as Kaimahi. We grounded this in Te Maramataka and also the frameworks of Tā Mason Jury's Te Whare Tapawha and the 5 ways to wellbeing. And across the course of our 6-week program, we took Kaimahi through different spaces that enabled them to focus on this, so that when they went back to their mahi, they could be filled up with that focus on wellbeing in their work. And we found that that has been received really positively, so it's something that we will continue to work on. So then turning to the context of crisis and the most recent crisis that we've had in Aotearoa New Zealand. So I guess as the full scale of the devastation of both the January floods and then Cyclone Gabriel began to, I guess, be revealed, we really realised that it was important that we were deeply understanding what was going on for our member organisations and Kaimahi and communities in affected rohe throughout Te Ika Maui. So we have spent the last few months, and we continue to be spending this time to really listen deeply to what our members in those affected regions are experiencing, what the experiences of children, rangatahi and whānau are, so that we can bring forward these insights in our mahi and advocate for what is needed and amplify those calls from our members and others in the community regarding the recovery and also the response. So I'll just take you now through a few different insights and the key areas that we have been hearing from our members. These are the issues that they have been telling us are in need of attention, ongoing attention, as we continue this recovery. So I start with the well-being of children and rangatahi, simply because children and rangatahi are often amongst the most affected people in situations of crisis, but often they are not visible. And unless we take intentional steps to make them visible in our response work and recovery work, their needs can often be overlooked. So we've heard from our members in affected rohe that children and rangatahi have and are continuing in some instances to experience significant disruption to their lives, including to their education, their community and cultural activities. And for some children, especially those in Tamaki Makaurau, this comes on top of considerable disruption over the past few years with COVID. Time out of education, out of usual community structures and engagement. So this is a significant concern now. Also, children and rangatahi are in many instances where they have experienced the floods or the cyclone, likely to be experiencing some level of anxiety or mental distress due to being impacted by these traumatic events they have had. And so that's why it's so important that they receive the support that they need. Housing is the second key issue that has been obviously coming through loud and clear from our members, and the scale of need for temporary accommodation, as I'm sure most people joining this webinar today will know, is huge. And I think it just bears repeating that for some people, they have really lost absolutely everything, and the scale of the impact on their life and the considerable stress that is causing and continuing to cause should not be underestimated. So in terms of safety and security of housing as well, we know that for some families in whānau over recent weeks, they have gone back into substandard housing, both after the floods and after the cyclone. And also for some families in whānau, they are having to continue to live in collectivised living arrangements on a longer term scale. So I know in Wairoa, for instance, we still have whānau a lot of whānau who are living together in marae. We've also been hearing about the security of homes that have been affected by the cyclone and the impacts of robberies of those homes and pillaging of property as well, which is of real concern too. In terms of repairs to homes, we know that for many families in whānau, they didn't have insurance before these events hit. And for some, we've heard that who did have insurance, we've heard that the time to repair is significant and long. We're talking years. So this insecurity of housing and the need for temporary accommodation that meets the needs of families in whānau is really, really considerable. The third issue that we have been hearing about is the importance of access to the basics. And here I'm talking about access to kai, to water, to communications, and to connectivity between places, so via our roads in particular. We know that there were some significant lag times in some areas to reconnect some of these services, and that caused a lot of stress for communities in hapori. In some areas, I know of a community up in Te Tai Tokerau that is still without power or only intermittent power. And so obviously the ongoing stress for whānau in these situations is significant. This also puts stresses on to families more widely as well. And of course, we have the significant cost of living that's rising for all of us, but in areas affected by these crises, the cost pressures on people are growing and huge, and support is continuing to be needed. When I talked about the roading, often times we are hearing that trips that used to be relatively short to main centres, so between 1 to 2 hours, are now taking people up to 6 to 8 hours, simply because of the different routes that are having to be used. So as Matthew said earlier, the importance of reconnecting that infrastructure is really, really crucial for people. Mental health and wellbeing, of course, is another significant issue that has been coming through loud and clear when we're having our conversations with those in affected rohe. The individual and collective trauma of people who have experienced these events, again, should not be underestimated. And as the shock has worn off over the past weeks, grief has certainly set in for many affected and will be long-lasting as well. And I also really want to acknowledge that I know that some people on this webinar today, you are living in affected rohe. So I just want to mihi to you all as well. It's really important that we are proactively thinking about the mental health and wellbeing impacts and what's needed, and I'll return to this a bit later on. Another issue that we have heard concerns about and that we have been raising is family harm and violence in our communities that have been affected. So as I mentioned, families in whānau have been under immense pressure during this time due to isolation, due to uncertainty, significant disruption in their lives. Loss of wahi tapu, of taonga, destruction of whenua. These are things that we know cause great stress to people naturally. And in some instances, these stresses have been leading to family harm incidents and also violence in the community. So we have reports from some of our members in the Napier region that it was really hard for them to actually get in to meet with some of the whānau who they needed support because of some of the threats and violence in those communities. And then for our social services kaimahi, so as some before we started this webinar, some of you who came on the call, you mentioned that you have been working in some of the emergency response centres. So the response has been incredible from our community-based social services, both in the floods and in the cyclone. And many kaimahi have been playing a proactive role to respond to community needs, setting up community hubs and responses, like Matthew said, in churches, in marae, in libraries, in schools. And these have been really powerful responses because our social services kaimahi are of their communities and hapori. So they know the people in their communities, they know the needs that are there. And so that's why these responses have really worked. Concerningly, in some areas, we've heard that when the civil defence and government response was triggered, that some of these community responses were sort of maybe dismantled a bit. And so we really want there to be a strong integrated response between community-based social services and the government social sector. And that's something that I think we can continue to work on. I also just want to highlight that in many instances, social services kaimahi will often be affected themselves by these crises in their communities and hapori. And so often they will be spending their days caring for others and supporting others, while they've also got the stress and the worry of what's going on with their own family and whānau in their own home on their mind as well. Also important that I mention that, as I said earlier, we've experienced now over the past 3 years what I refer to as 3 years of endurance work across our social sector, responding to COVID. Many of our social services kaimahi are, like our health services kaimahi, understandably fatigued and exhausted due to that cumulative effect of this endurance working. And so these most recent crises are on top of that, and we really need to recognise that and the importance of focusing on keeping our workforce well, so that we can continue to be responsive to community need. So then turning now to sort of a forward-facing view of what's needed and what is so important as we continue to support communities in hapori and recovery from the cyclone and the floods. I come back to my earlier slide. From our perspective at SSPA, it really needs to be a dual focus. It needs to be about that manaaki for our whānau, and at the same time manaaki for kaimahi who are working on ensuring that the response and the recovery is strong. And I would say that is both across our community-based social sector and also our government social sector, and the importance of us working together in a collaborative way is absolutely crucial. We need to, I'll just touch on 3 things at a high level that are really important in the so ata whakarongo, listening with care. This needs to underlie our whole approach, and I'm talking here about listening to those people who have been affected, who live in these community and hapori and affected rohe, listening to what they need, what their solutions are, and being led by those. Upholding te tiriti o Waitangi. This is crucial so that we see an equitable response and that tangata whenua rights and wellbeing is upheld. And the response and recovery needs to be both people-centred and responsive. And it needs to ultimately, first and foremost, be led by the communities and hapori affected and supported by those such as central government to enable this to happen well. And then this slide is almost my last one, just to, excuse me, highlight the various things that we have specifically been calling for in terms of the recovery. So first of all, it is about prioritising the basics and investing in communities and hapori. So we need to ensure, as Matthew said, that that infrastructure is recovered as soon as possible. And also that where we are investing things like generators into communities and dehumidifiers, that these things actually stay in communities so that they can continue to be used over the long term and in future crises as well. We need to be providing temporary accommodation in homes that truly meet the needs of those who are living in them, including the needs of children and rangatahi and whānau, of disabled people and people with other particular needs that need to be met during this time. Homes that are temporary also need to keep people well. So we need to be ensuring that we have that strong focus on providing temporary accommodation that is actually going to help people to support their recovery during this time before they can get back into their own home or longer term accommodation. When it comes to holistic hauora and wellbeing support, this has to be available for all who have been affected by these crises. We need to be funding and scaling up our effective mental health and psychological support services for children and rangatahi, for whānau, and we need to be promoting these so that people know that they are there for them and accessible for them. We also advocate for holistic hauora and wellbeing, including mental health, to be an explicit strand of the recovery program and the recovery plans within each rohe. And we think that this needs to have oversight at that national level from the Minister for Cyclone Recovery, so that that integrated focus on mental health and wellbeing is not lost in this recovery process. When it comes to children and rangatahi, we need to also integrate a focus on their rights and wellbeing. Again, we're advocating for focus on children to be an explicit strand of the regional recovery plans, and that also children and young people, they have a right to participate under the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child. Let's actually give life to that right and ensure that their voices and experiences are coming through and able to actually influence the recovery plans in each affected region. When it comes to our community-based social services, they need to be enabled to do the work that they do. We've been really pleased that the government has responded to our calls to up the level of grant funding that's available, and also some of the compliance burden, such as reporting, has been temporarily lifted off our providers like it was during some of the COVID lockdowns. That's really positive, but we need to keep going. These services need to be sustainably funded so that they can do the work that they need to do. Coordination as well is critical, so that, and I'm talking here coordination between government and non-government sector, between government and iwi, so that everyone is on the same page about where we're going with recovery. And of course, the well-being of the workforce needs to be maintained and supported. And lastly, we need to be planning together and preparing and looking ahead. Climate change is a reality. We can take steps to mitigate its impacts, but we know that there are going to be future natural disasters in New Zealand. The more that we can be doing to be planning ahead together and preparing, so that we are able to work together collaboratively and responsibly when these events hit. We have had the most clear illustration of this this year, and we need to pay heed to that and be working together now, so that when that time does come, we can activate those plans and work well together with people at the centre. So finally, just take you back to our two images there. For us, it does need to be about whānau outcomes and also about the workforce that supports them. So I think I will leave it there. My contact details are there if anyone wants to get in touch, and look forward to the discussion. Kia ora.
Kia ora. Thank you, Claire. I think I'd add one more takeaway message to that, which is we should just let Claire do the talking, and I'll just stand in the background and do this every now and then. That was excellent. Thank you very much. It's really neat to have the on-the-ground stuff, and I guess something probably I should have said at the start is that our report was very deliberately focused on taking what we can learn from COVID-19 and looking forwards. It wasn't an attempt to evaluate the ongoing response from Cyclone Gabrielle and the floods. but having that on the ground look that you've brought is really valuable, and it brings it home, and it shows that very powerful lesson, I think, also that all these things are tied together. So, you talked about children having education disrupted, which obviously is an education issue, and you can hear the public servant in me already talking by appropriation. But as well as an education issue, it means those children have lost contact with their friends, and that's a huge well-being thing. And they have less oversight from people in their community that care about them, and so that's a family violence and safety thing. And so there's all this stuff is tied together, and you'd do the same again for housing, or the same again for being able to ensure that there's kai and there's water available, and knowing that people's response to trauma and ongoing mental health is going to be impacted by those stresses of not being able to look after the kids, or not knowing if your family up the coast has what they need. So I think that's a really powerful message for us here, is that particularly when we're planning the response to these things, that these are all tied together. No one problem is any one person's or one group's problem to fix. But that's also, that is a challenge, but it's also, I think, a really useful sort of burning platform for here's why we need to address these things, because we all benefit from it. We all contribute to the sort of improved well-being as a result. That was fantastic. Thank you, Claire. And at this point, we have the opportunity to take any questions from people. We have the chat available if you want to throw them in there, or hopefully I'm hoping Katie can help me if people want to raise their hands, or even just unmute themselves and jump in if they have any questions for myself or for Claire.
So we do have some comments in the chat if people are comfortable to read this out. So Victoria says, the parent of a teenager who is only just starting to have a stable mental health, the impacts on our tamariki are significant. Thank you so much for sharing this information. Thank you, Victoria.
And if I can just briefly respond to Victoria's point, kia ora, Victoria. Yeah, I think something that we have been very conscious of through COVID is that when we're and in any crisis, I think at the time, we can see some of the impacts on our children and young people, but often it is that sort of long tail, longer term impact as well that we also need to be thinking about. So, and I think we need to also learn from some of our previous experiences in Aotearoa New Zealand. So, for example, the Canterbury earthquakes, quite a lot of research has been done into the impacts of that disaster on children in rangatahi and as they grow up. And we need to be really looking at that, and I think the actions that we can take during a crisis need to be thinking a few years out as well. So it needs to be that both here and in the future focus too.
Thank you, Claire. Kelly, you've got your hand raised, so I'm going to spotlight you so you can ask.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for the amazing presentation. I think a lot of highlight that in Asian Family Services, because we also, and MSD, we respond some of the cyclone and flood, and the COVID time, we did have some response, of course, from different projects as well. I just wondering, it's a great report, and there's one of the things challenge I always want to advocate is the mental health, that the government has a lot of response, but again, for the ethnic Asian diverse population, often don't really get those culturally and linguistic mental health support, and even in the public health campaign space that are kind of quite missing as well. And one of the things I really want to point out, learning from the COVID-19, is there is quite increasing of racism and discrimination going on. So that quite challenging for a lot of ethnic Asian population, and that wasn't quite addressed. So yeah, and particular, the other things I want to highlight is ongoing mental health issues for young people, that particular area that affected by the recent flooding, which we're seeing that's ongoing kind of needs as well, apart from the people we really need, like the essential support like food and accommodation and all the other things. And definitely domestic violence is one of another highlight that drive people under those kind of circumstances and stress. So yeah, I just want to ask a big question about how those kind of report leads to government agencies collaboration in terms of addressing those issues from Te Whatuora or MSD or across the board, and social services, of course. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Kelly. Important question, and really appreciate your comments. I'm going to spotlight Matt to respond, if that's all good.
Thanks. Yes, you're right. And these are all issues that we've sort of picked up to different degrees across our reporting so far. Obviously, not all of it was something that we flagged as a direct relation then into the cyclone, and maybe some of that is stuff we've missed. But yeah, we've discussed in different ways some of the impacts of racism and discrimination, particularly on people feeling safe in the home, when digital connectivity means that abuse or harmful behaviour reaches straight into the home during lockdowns and things. And obviously the impacts on young people and family violence stuff. We've explored it a little, and Claire has as well. In terms of addressing these, I mean, that's the big question, right? That's the challenge for all of us. So that's part of the reason why we're producing these reports and having this webinar. Is at Hiringa Mahara, we don't provide services, but we shine the light on mental health and well-being and the things that contribute to it. Those things, like you say, you've flagged all these important issues that might not necessarily usually show up as a mental health issue, but for us it is. It's all mental health and well-being, and it's tied together, and that's why we're doing this work. And so our role, I guess, is to shine a light and to create that burning platform to show that there's things here that need action, and to bring together the agencies from across government and encourage action, which is I guess what we're working on and what we're working towards. But I haven't got a magic wand, and I haven't got a silver bullet, sorry, as much as I wish I had. Only that I really appreciate that we've got this group of people here who are interested and are listening and learning from one another, and take it back to where they do their day jobs. And we'll keep pushing it as well. Thanks, Kelly.
Awesome. Thank you, Gabriel. I'm going to go to you next, and then Anna, I'll come to you. Did that work?
Okay, thank you, Katie. Gabriel from Rural Women New Zealand. Thank you to both Matt and Claire. I think you've highlighted some really important issues. Something that is coming through from the groups we have working on the ground is still a sense of some siloing and lack of coordination of effort and some frustration. And I think it's particularly in that rural space where in the past, there have been some things that have worked quite well, but that they're just, I mean, actually this morning I was speaking both to a person on the ground in the Hawke's Bay and later on to someone in Tairāwhiti, and that seems to be something that's still of an issue of concern to them. I wondered if either of you had any comment on what else we could be doing, because I think we're all trying to do what we can to make sure we coordinate as best we can, but whether you had any thoughts on what else we might be doing to promote that. And just an observation as well, I've had some time in a background in a social services organisation before my role at Rural Women, and in my role at Rural Women, I noticed that some of the things I would have been aware of when I was working in that social services space don't come across my radar now, and yet they're quite relevant to the work we might be doing on the ground in a rural community. And I wonder if some of that lack of coordination just comes from we are still a little bit siloed in terms of our bigger sector work. So yeah, just interested to see what your take is on that. Thank you.
I can go first, and Claire can jump in if you like. So you probably, I mean, again, our work hasn't been on the cyclone, but I think what you can take from what we've learned is that, I understand the siloing and the frustration, and from a I'm in Wellington, sorry. From a Wellington sort of point of view, it's a constant refrain of we need to break down these silos when they get in the way. And from a sort of government agency response, I think where groups come together, it tends to be at a relatively high level, and it's sort of governance based, and it has a big picture thing, and it's really useful. But the sort of further removed you are from the issue, the harder it is to act quickly. And so I think that's why, to an extent, the recommendations we've made and that Claire has made as well about supporting community groups on the ground and giving them the resources to do the jobs well is sort of the practical step, because they tie together all those amazing things. you show up to a marae that's opened its doors, and you have somewhere where you can get clothing and support and information, and you can tell people, and you can get hold of mental health support if you need, and people will then get you on a list that they can come and check on you, and social services can reach in. And so in that sense, I guess, to me, that collaboration works very well at a practical level on the ground. And it works from a sort of governance level further back, and it's getting that sort of balance in between the two, where you can sort of scale up the small stuff or make the big stuff more practical. And that's the ongoing challenge, I guess, we have to keep tackling. Is there anything further to add, Claire?
Yeah, kia ora, Gabrielle, and thanks for the work that your organisation does. I think two thoughts briefly to add. It really highlights the importance of relationships, and not just during times of crisis, but on an ongoing basis. So the areas where I see coordination working well around the country, they are the areas where those pre-existing relationships are there between community sector and government, between different government agencies. And that enables things to really work much more smoothly when a crisis does occur. So I think continuing to invest our focus in building those relationships at all times is critical. And then I think as well, coordinated communication from government can make a huge difference. So something that was happening early on in COVID was that our members, social service providers, were getting lots of different messages coming from different government agencies. And so we said, hey, it would actually be great if could coordinate that and just the messaging come from one agency for our social service providers. That worked really well once that started happening, because people could know, oh, I need to look out for that email from MSD or that message from MSD, and that's where the information will be coming from. So I think we can learn from those kinds of things as well.
I'm going to go to Anna next, and then we've got a question in the chat, and then we might hold there and close the webinar. I will put our contact information in for both Claire and Te Hiringa Mahara, so if there's anything else that you haven't been able to ask, we can get there. So Anna, I am going to spotlight you. There we go.
Kia ora koutou. Yeah, I just want to acknowledge the work that's been done to present the voices of the community and how it's been out there as a sort of a frontline social service organisation. It is everything that you've said absolutely aligns with our experience. My challenge, I suppose, to the group is, look, we know this, right? And we've been saying this as frontline community workers in this work, both through COVID and now through adverse weather events. And we're seeing extreme levels of more referrals coming through. Like we have double what we had 18 months ago, and there's just not enough resource on the ground for this literal swell of tidal wave of need out there. And yet our voices are being heard, but nothing is being, activated as far as the important work. What you're talking about is the longer term work. We might get a little bit of money at the beginning of the crisis, do what you can, and it will literally be used up within a month. But what we're seeing now is just swells and swells of need, which is burning out staff, and knowing that there is no cavalry coming, and like to your point, Matthew, there's no silver bullet. Well, there is a silver bullet, and that's more resources coming to the community groups that are doing this work. That it is an ongoing challenge. We are being heard, but nothing is being done. So advocate for us, Matthew. Claire, you're doing a great job in the pay equity, acknowledging that. Thank you for your advocacy in that space. This is coming from a very exhausted community group.
Thanks, Anna. Message received. I mean, I don't know if there's much more I can say than that right now, but message received, and like, yeah, as we've said through our reports, this is investment that is needed, and these are groups that need to be supported and resourced and need to be resilient and sustainable. And yeah, we'll keep pushing that where we can, and hopefully there's enough people online today who can also take it back to where they need to take that same message. Thank you.
And just very briefly from me, Anna, yeah, we continue to tautoko your calls and champion that on behalf of our community-based social services. Absolutely more resources needed. And I think for too long, our community-based social services have been relied on as, you know, they'll always go above and beyond and keep on giving and giving. And we have an amazing workforce who often that is the way. But as I said earlier, the cumulative effect of these various crises that have occurred over the past few years has taken a real toll, and there is a significant need for more investment and also better planning for our workforce as well, both in the here and now and also in the coming years. So we're continuing to be on it too.
And that is probably a good place for us to leave it, I think. There was one more question in the chat, but I think that Claire is going to have a talk with Mary separately. So I just want to thank everybody, particularly thank you, Claire. That was brilliant. And thank you everybody who contributed, and to the people who are online who have contributed to the COVID reports as they've gone through. So really appreciate all of the input and all of the insight and all of the support to make, you know, important work that actually means something. I hope you found this all interesting and enlightening. And yes, like I said, next time we'll just let Claire do all the work, but that's all right. Please stay in touch. The contact information's in the chat, including email addresses for us. Keep an eye on our website for our upcoming releases. And I'll just do a quick karakia to close the meeting and send us on our way. Ka whakairia te tapu, kia wātia ai te ara, kia tūruku whakataha ai, kia tūruku whakataha ai, haumia uie tae kia. Thank you, everybody. Have a lovely long weekend.